Hello, hello, hello. Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of Bent Pages and Bending Bodies. I'm your hostess, Hannah P. And you already know before we get into today's episode, go ahead and follow, subscribe to this page. The Instagram is at BPBB Podcast, like Bent Pages, Bending Bodies Podcast. Yep, you already know. BPBB Podcast. You can also find this video on YouTube with the same handle, BPBB Podcast. And then this audio will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Guys, I am so sorry. I will admit, I'm going to be honest real quick. I've been lazy. I have not been doing this podcast like I need to be doing. So for that, I apologize. It's been a super long time, since I've done a book review. So without further ado, here it is, right? So if you don't remember, it was like way back. I mentioned that I was going to be reading Forgetting the Benefits of Remembering by Scott A. Small. And yeah, I have completed that book. It was a good book. And now here is the review. So I have a little bio, a little synopsis, if you will, to kind of get us started. So here it is. Forgetting isn't a mental hiccup, but a vital brain function, according to Scott A. Small in Forgetting the Benefits of Not Remembering. By discarding unnecessary details, our brains make space for new information. It protects us from emotional overload, and it even fuels our creativity. This book explores the science behind forgetting and its positive impact on cognitive function, emotional well being, and even social harmony. While acknowledging the fear of forgetting associated with the diseases like Alzheimer's, Small emphasizes the crucial role forgetting plays in optimal brain function. So yeah, that's just kind of like a little bit of synopsis. As I mentioned in the so long ago previous book review, this was more of a sciencey type of book. So it doesn't get too sciencey. I'll talk about that more later, but it's not too sciencey, but it definitely is a different book than I am used to reading. So I thought it was very interesting. So let's go ahead and get into it, right? Who is Scott A. Small and why is he even equipped to talk about forgetting? Well, I have a little bio on him too. So yeah, Scott A. Small is a prominent American neurologist and neuroscientist known for his expertise in Alzheimer's disease and normal cognitive aging. So yeah, his focus is on Alzheimer's disease, which I think we all know what that is. But for those who don't know, dementia, that's probably a more common word for it. So as we get older, individuals, we tend to forget things more and more. And so Alzheimer's disease is basically a disease where you literally forget so much of yourself. And then eventually in the end of the disease, in the end stage, you actually forget normal human function. So you forget to eat, you forget to drink. So that's kind of how the disease progresses. But anyway, this is not a PT podcast today. So if you don't know what Alzheimer's is or dementia is, Google it. But basically, it's just when people forget. And like I said, as you get older, that is more common. But Alzheimer's is different in the sense of you forget those bodily functions, those normal activities of your daily life that most of us would remember. So that is what Alzheimer's is. So that's his focus. So Scott A. Small did go to Columbia University, which is an Ivy League. So shout out to him. He's smart or whatever. And now he's actually a professor of neurology at Columbia. So he teaches. Let's see. His research really focuses on the hippocampus, which I will get into a little bit more later, but that is a major part of remembering. And then let's talk about some of his achievements. Okay, the biggest achievement that stuck out to me, guys, this man has authored over 140 research papers. Guys, that is insane. It's very impressive, that part of insane, right? Um, so I will talk about this more on a different episode, but your girl completed a residency program, okay? And in that residency, I too had to write a research paper. And my goodness, the amount of work that goes into it. Okay, first of all, you have to do so much research before you even get into your part of the paper, right? You have to research, you have to give all of these citations and pull up in background information. That way you can set the stage for your research paper. And then the overall research paper, it requires tons of edits, right? I think for each section, for my personal research paper, I had to do like 3 to 4 edits for it, and that's just per section. So it took a long time. It took a couple of months actually to write this paper. I did not want to pursue getting it published because that would be even more work, and that residency kicked my butt. So again, that will be in a different episode, but I just kind of know the process of writing a research paper, one, and then to not only write the research paper, but to also have it published. Listen, even if you have co-writers with you, it's still an intense process. I did not have co-writers with me, but it's still an intense process. So kudos to Scott A. Small for 140 research papers. Like that's amazing, honestly. So in that regard, we already know that, he's a little bit knowledgeable. He knows a little bit about something about this subject, right? Yeah, he does. So, yeah, that's Scott A. Small. Just to kind of break it down a little bit, that's like his major achievements. Um, yeah, right. So now we're going to talk about the hippocampus, which is an area of the brain that is really talked about in this book. It's really throughout this book. Like I said, it was Scott A. Small. It's one of his research points. It's one of the things that he really researches. So let's talk about it. So your hippocampus, you have two hippocampi. They are located in your temporal lobe, right? And you're like, I don't know what that means, Hannah. That's okay. It's okay. So we have a frontal lobe, which is in the front part of your brain, like where your forehead is, basically. Then you have two parietal lobes, which are slightly behind your frontal lobe, but it's on both sides of your head, right? And then kind of like where your ears are, that's where your temporal lobes are. And that is where the hippocampus is located. So because you have two temporal lobes, you have two hippocampi. Yeah. So the job of the hippocampus is really crucial in memory, learning, and spatial navigation. So the hippocampus is essential for taking short-term memory and converting it to long-term memory. That's basically its main job to do. In terms of spatial processing, it helps us navigate our surroundings. It helps us remember locations. Again, memory, right? So it's kind of like our internal GPS system, if you will. And then finally, when it comes to learning, obviously we have to remember the things we've learned to be able to carry them over to other tasks in our day. So it's heavily, heavily involved in learning as well. Therefore, if your hippocampus is impaired, you will have impairments in your memory. You'll have impairments in your spatial reasoning. So, kind of, again, navigating around your space, your area. And you'll also have impairments in your ability to learn. Yeah, that's a big gist of the hippocampus. All right, guys. So now let's kind of get into the key points of the book. This is a sciencey book, like I said. However, it's not too sciencey. So again, I will give my review at the end of this, but I still think that a lot of people can enjoy it. But one of the biggest things that Scott A. Small talks about is just the benefit to forgetting, right? In forgetting, we as humans, first of all, I think that forgetting tends to have a negative connotation, right? Like none of us like to forget someone's name or not remember it, right? None of us really like to not remember a situation or an event. That's kind of scary, right? We like to remember that. However, there are instances where forgetting is actually helpful and it benefits us, right? And so one of the first things that Scott A. Small talks about is that forgetting actually helps our minds generalize information. So he uses autism as an example, right? So most of us individuals without autism, because we slightly forget a little things, one or two things here and there, we don't have as concrete thinking as an individual with autism does. And so, why that is important is that allows us to have what we call behavioral flexibility because we're able to forget a little bit when we have to pivot and change in our day because life is crazy, right? We are able to have that behavioral flexibility to handle that situation. However, an individual with autism, their thinking tends to be more concrete. They remember more information. They remember the little pieces of things that most of us wouldn't pay attention to. And because of that, it's harder for them to have behavioral flexibility because they're like, it's supposed to be like this. Why are you changing it on me? And they don't like that change. They don't tend to like that fluctuation in their day. And so that is kind of like a sensory overload to them sometimes. For us who or individuals, I should say, who don't have autism, who have more of that flexibility, that mental flexibility, behavioral flexibility, if we have to pivot, it's okay, because our brain can let some of the information that we've already learned go, and we can make new memories, and we can it just helps us overall with our generalization, I guess to say. And I just thought it was a really interesting point when he was talking about autism because, again, a lot of these individuals have that more concrete thinking. So he mentions a book or a movie, I think it is. It's called Rain Man. I've heard of it, never seen it, but the movie basically is about a man, I think supposedly with autism. I don't know if he does. Maybe I think he has autism, like savantism, where basically if you like say a day, he can say like, okay, that was a Tuesday, right? So you can say like January 31st, 1982, right? And he can kind of like go in his memory and just calculate, okay, it was that day. Or in Rain Man, apparently he just doesn't forget anything. He remembers every single thing. And so Scott talks about how that originally might sound appealing, right? Like, oh, if I can remember every single thing, like that would be awesome. But over time, Rain Man kind of goes crazy, and the amount of information that our brains would receive and have to store to be able to remember every single thing would actually drive us crazy. Like it would literally drive us crazy. So he talks about how just the benefit of forgetting one allows for new memories to form, but just also just to decrease our sensory overload. Um, Going back to autism a little bit, these individuals, because they remember so much, sometimes they cannot, how should I say this? Sometimes they have a more difficult time in recognizing things. I know that's like an ambiguous word, but whether it's emotions, facial expressions, sometimes they have a hard time recognizing that because it is in a different context now. And so they don't pick up on those social cues like we do because their brain isn't as flexible. And this is no shade to anybody with autism, but it's just saying that, with having a more flexible mind, with having more of that behavioral flexibility and being able to pivot in our day, being able to adjust, make changes, that helps us out versus an individual with autism. One, it might be like every every different thing is almost like a new experience to them, and that's a sensory overlay. If you listen, let's say you saw somebody, right? This is just an example. You saw somebody in the morning. They look a little bit different by the afternoon, or better yet, because you guys have been checking out my videos. Hopefully, you saw me, right? I just had some dreads, some faux locks, right? Now I have this red hair. An individual with autism might not be able to recognize me because I look different. However, individuals without autism, because we have that more flexible mind, because we can kind of forget a little part of what I used to look like, you know that my facial features are still the same. You recognize my voice. And so you can tell even without my hair changing colors or my hair looking different, that I'm still the same person. However, an individual with autism, I might be a stranger to them if I just walked up to them. I might have to explain, hey, I'm still Hannah P. I'm still the hostess of Bent Pages, Bending Bodies. And that would just kind of be like a little bit of a shock to their system. So, in that way, forgetting is actually important. So I thought that was a really interesting point. He also goes on to talk about, AI and technology and the advancements. So there was a little snippet that was mentioned about mugshots, right? And how it's taken typically against a white wall. You have the height there. That was to be able to assist the computer programs in facial recognition. However, now as AI develops, they are starting to build in some generalization, I guess to say, into the AI programming. So even if a person might change their hair or might have glasses or a hat, that the overall appearance can still be analyzed, right? So there's still facial recognition, but they built in programming to AI to be able to distinguish, like, okay, this is still the same person, no matter their hair color, no matter if they're wearing glasses, no matter if they're wearing a hat, right? So that was just like a cool little insert. He didn't get too much into it, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I just thought that that was a really cool analysis that he used. Um, and also, it just talks about how our technology and society is advancing. So another key point that he talks about is when we go to sleep, there's actually like a pruning process that happens, right? So when we are asleep, our brain kind of goes through this system of, okay, do I need this information? No. If not, discard it. Do I need this information? Yes, I do. Okay, store it. Do I need this? No, discard. So that's like that's the pruning process while we're asleep. So it's able to get rid of the information that we don't need. And again, as mentioned kind of in the overview, that allows us to be able to store new information, right? Because honestly, guys, there's so much going on in our world. If we stored literally every little piece, we literally would go insane. Like, there's no doubt about it, right? So, hold on. Let me just kind of break it down real quick, kind of give you guys an example. So, you know how when you're wearing clothes, right? You put your clothes on, and after a while, you stopped feeling that you're wearing clothes. Like, obviously, we know we are because we're out in public. Hopefully, you're wearing clothes in public, but we know that we're wearing something. But after a while, your body, your brain gets used to that sensation on your skin, and you can kind of just like ignore it, right? The same thing with like our nose. Okay, fun fact, guys. So if you close one eye, you can see your nose, right? If you close the other eye, you can see your nose. But when you have both eyes open, like you can kind of see your nose, but your brain chooses to ignore that because that's just too much information to your system. The same thing goes for all information in our lives. If we had to pay attention to every single little thing, it would drive our brains crazy. And so Scott really talks about the benefits and, discarding and not paying attention to certain um, inputs and information that we get just to kind of help with our sanity. So that was a really cool point too. The next point he really talks about is just that in forgetting, this actually can help with our creativity, right? It goes back to that being able to generalize information, being able to be flexible with information, right? So if you want to create something, when you get like stuck in a rut and you're like, you know what, I need to step outside the box, right? That's what we think of as creativity, stepping outside of the box. And individuals who are able to forget a little bit, who are able to have that flexibility in their mental, have an easier time doing that. And individuals, again, we're going to go back to autism, they have that more concrete thinking and it's more difficult for them to be creative. It's more difficult because they're like, well, no, this is how it's been. This is how I've seen it. And they're kind of like stuck in the box. They have a hard time getting out of that box. So, an example that he used, and this is not really about creativity, but kind of going back into the benefits of forgetting and just kind of thinking about that concrete mind, there's a study that showed individuals without autism, they were completing a puzzle, right? And the scientists, the researchers, they timed the length it took to finish the puzzle without knowing what the image was, right? Then they compared that to the time it took for individuals to complete the puzzle with having the box, right? So, with a puzzle box, it shows you what the puzzle should look like. It has that image. So it's like, okay, if I see the image, that helps me, get a little faster in my solving this puzzle, right? That's for individuals without autism. They were faster, I think, obviously. I know I would be faster if I had the picture in front of me, but they were faster when they had the picture in front of them versus without having that image and having to kind of solve it themselves. Whereas individuals with autism, they actually had no difference in time versus when they had the picture versus without that picture. So it just kind of shows you again that they have that more concrete thinking that doesn't allow them to be as flexible and I guess make those changes, take those risks that individuals without autism do that typically do. Further, he talks about how, when we are trying to learn a new task, right? Instead of learning, so, okay, let me back up a little bit. When we are learning a new task, our brain creates a program, right? So for me to bring this cup to my mouth, there is a literal program for that. So my brain says, okay, biceps, activate, and whatever muscle group to, because again, this is not a PT podcast, so I'm not going into too much science, but my brain has a motor program for my hand coming to my mouth, right? If I want to modify that program, right, instead of bringing the cup to my mouth, I want to bring the cup out, right? It's actually easier for our brain to modify the program versus creating a whole different program. I hope that makes sense so far. So instead of learning a whole new program, a whole new muscle group to do this different task, our brain is like, you know what? We already know how to bring the cup to the mouth, right? We're going to modify it just a little bit. We're going to chop off this little part. We're going to edit and we're going to insert different muscles real quick to be able to not just only bring the cup to my mouth, but to extend the cup, right? That's the same way our brain works with other tasks. So if we're learning to walk, right, it's easier for us to, okay, we have the motor program to walk. Now we want to run, it's easier for our brain to modify our walking program versus create a whole different program for running. And so, in that sense, too, in terms of creativity, like we're talking about, it's the same thing. It's easier for our brains to modify already learned information and then kind of build on that versus creating a whole new creativity, whole new motor programming to what we're trying to achieve. Um, so yeah, that's how forgetting helps with our creativity. We kind of forget a little bit. That way we're able to make space for those new memories. We're able to kind of get out of the box because of our behavioral flexibility that goes along with forgetting. All right. So another key point that he talks about is that forgetting is really important for our overall happiness and moving forward with situations, hurtful situations, traumatic situations. It's helpful to forget some of that information, right? So we are all human, we all make mistakes. I'm sure, without even meeting you guys, I am sure that someone has hurt you, whether intentionally or unintentionally. You face some type of trauma. We cannot compare trauma levels to each other, but there has been something, a hardship in your life, right? Or just a tough situation that you've had to go through. And while we still remember that situation, while we still remember, maybe what we felt during that situation, in forgetting, we're able to move past that situation, right? It's not like we're living that same event every single day. And so a major part of this, along with the hippocampus, is the amygdala. So real quick, guys, I know I'm throwing some, little educational pieces out, you guys. So I hope that you're liking it. But So yeah, so your amygdala is heavily, heavily involved in your emotional processing, your fear response, and your emotional memory, right? Also social behavior. But those are the big keys, right? Emotional processing, fear response, emotional memory. And that goes along with your hippocampus, which we talked about is about memories. And so your amygdala and your hippocampus kind of work together, right? So again, because the amygdala is about emotional processing, we go through an event, right? First of all, our hippocampus will remember that event, but then our amygdala really kicks in, right? And it's like, this was a fear response, or this was a sad response or an anger response, whatever emotion that you're feeling, that's what your amygdala does, right? It processes that emotion. And so to be able to kind of move forward in our lives, right? To not face the same hurt that you're feeling today, you don't want to feel that tomorrow, right? I guess if we are talking about, you know how they say like time heals all wounds, let's just kind of give like numerical values to this. Today, I get broken up with, I'm at 100% depression, I'm sad, right? But maybe in a week, I might be like 80% sad. And then 2 weeks, hopefully like 50 to 30% sad, and it just keeps kind of going from there. That is the benefit of forgetting, right? I'm not reliving that same heartbreak and trauma every single day. Every single day, I kind of forget a little bit of that emotional distress I felt. I forget a little bit of the turmoil within, if you will. And I'm able to kind of see past, right? And then eventually, hopefully, the heartbreak or the, tragic event is not as hurtful to me. Yes, I still remember the event. I still remember being broken up with, right? Um, yes, I might remember how I felt on that initial day, right? I was depressed. I was so sad. I was crying, listening to music, whatever the case is on how you handle stress, right? You remember it. But the intensity of which I feel the emotions hopefully will dissipate, as time goes on. And that's a part of the pruning process of the brain and getting rid of, memories and forgetting. It's a part of that process. And individuals who have PTSD or post traumatic stress disorder, unfortunately, they are not able to forget part of that traumatic event or that stress that they felt in that time. And so with these individuals, they can have a trigger, whatever that trigger may be. They were talking about, individuals who go to war, for example. Um, there's something that can bring them right back into that zone, into that moment where they were getting shot at or they were shooting people, right? Post traumatic stress disorder. And so those individuals have a hard time forgetting and letting go of some of the information, like I said, that traumatic event that happened. And so that is why when they get triggered, they're right back in that situation. Whereas individuals without PTSD, like I said, we kind of have that, we're able to forget, and kind of each day we forget a little bit more and more of the intensity of the emotions that we felt. And that allows us to progress in our lives and, pursue new relationships or new activities, whatever it was that traumatized you. If you forget a little bit about it, again, yes, you may remember the event. Yes, you will remember, kind of the emotions you were feeling at that time. But over time, our emotions decrease, they lessen. Um, and that's a part of the forgetting process. And so because of that, like I said, we're able to move forward with our lives. We're able to form new memories and new relationships, create new activities to kind of help keep keep us going, and so it helps out with our overall happiness and forgetting, because if we were not able to forget, again, the person with PTSD, we could potentially relive the same event every single day, or it would just be a recurrent event. And that's no fun to anybody. Who wants to go through heartbreak all the time? Who wants to go through, whatever PTSD moment that you have, who wants to go through that every day? So forgetting a little bit of the emotion or the intensity of the emotions that you felt is actually really beneficial in helping us move forward. And then finally, guys, his last point is basically on pathological forgetting versus normal forgetting. So when we talk about pathology, that is usually has like a root cause disease, right? So he mentioned Alzheimer's disease frequently throughout this text, and that is a pathological version of forgetting. That is something that is disease related, which is causing you to forget more than you should. Whereas normal forgetting, that happens with all of us. Like I already mentioned previously, all the times where forgetting is important, but then also kind of like as we naturally age, yes, we tend to have poorer memories. That's just the reality of life. The connections aren't they're not connecting like they used to be. They're not firing like they used to be. And so that is where normal aging and normal forgetting happens. But in the case of, Alzheimer's, he does talk about the impact, not only on the individual, but on the family. So just a little side note, I do, as a clinician, I think that Alzheimer's does really affect the family more than the patient, because the family remembers everything. They remember all the good times and all these memories, and so the patient who has Alzheimer's, they're like, I don't know what I don't know. I don't remember what I don't know exactly. And so they usually have an easier time going through Alzheimer's disease where it's really hard on the family and their friends. So that's just like a little side note. Um, so yeah, that's basically the gist of the book. It's a pretty short read or listen, if you will, because guys, I'm busy and I listen to these books right now. I will actually read one. Don't get me wrong. I will sit down and read, but right now it's just easier for me to listen to these audiobooks. So overall, I thought that this was a really interesting book. It could be a little heavy at times where it took me a while to get through just because I felt like I had to be in the right space to hear the information. If you're not in the right space to listen or to read, I feel like it's really easy to kind of zone out. And then I'd zone out and I'm like, oh, wait, what did I just miss? And I have to like go back, go back, go back. So listen, read when you have time, when you're going to be really engaged, because it's a sciencey book, some of the stuff can kind of go over your head, and then next thing you know, you're like, wait, what is this man even talking about right now? But overall, I do think that he had a pretty good argument for why forgetting is important. Like I said earlier in this podcast, I think that we typically have a negative connotation on forgetting. None of us like to not remember something, right? I think, and we also see that, or I see that in my field of study. So I work with individuals with brain injury, right? And when the brain doesn't know a piece of information, it likes to just fill stuff in. And so people will say wild stuff, right? You ask them, I don't know, what did you do yesterday? And because they can't remember, they will say like they're literally in the hospital. Okay, first of all, these individuals that I work with are typically like in a rehab or hospital setting. But you ask them, what did you do yesterday? And because the brain can't remember, it will literally fill in information. So it'll be like, oh, I went on, a 3-mile hike with my husband, and then we went kayaking, and it'll be like, no, girl. No, you didn't. Right. So the brain does not like to remember. That's just an overall thing. But the brain also has to forget a little bit. So it's a fine balance between the two. And again, I'm probably not articulating this as well as Scott A. Smith because this is his field of research, but it was just really interesting to me because I can see both sides, right? I deal with a lot of individuals who cannot remember. They have poor memory because of their brain injury, because of their stroke or whatever injury that they have, and I can see how the brain does not like to not know. And so like they fill in just random information, whether it's true or not true. And no, they don't think that they're lying, right? So we don't call them liars. We say it's confabulation. They're making up stories, but it's not on purpose, right? They're not trying to mislead you. They're not trying to be deceitful, but the brain likes to have information. It likes to know what's going on. And so on the other end of the spectrum, where the brain wants to remember, it wants to hold on to pieces of information. I felt like Scott A. Small did a really good job in showing the other side of where how forgetting is actually essential. It's important to us. And like I said, creating new memories, creating moving on with our lives to create happiness, to create creativity. All the things I already mentioned in those key points, that is how the brain functions and is more beneficial with forgetting. So I thought that was a good argument. I didn't really know what I was coming into in this book. And like I said, in dealing with brain injury, I was like, well, how is forgetting actually beneficial? But I think that Scott really made a good point, a really good argument on how forgetting is important. And what he would classify brain injury as would be that pathological forgetting. So there's an underlying cause for why forgetting is happening. And that's different from our normal forgetting. So I thought that in that case it was good. Overall, guys, I think that this book can be enjoyed by people who are not in the health field, people who are just interested in memory, right? I think that anybody can really read this book if it sounds interesting to you. If it doesn't sound interesting to you, I wouldn't recommend it because like I said, it's easy to tune out. It's easy to kind of just dissociate yourself for a second and then come back and you're like, oh, wait, what are we talking about? Right. I think that Scott did a really good job in not making it too sciencey. So he really explained and described all the parts of the brain that he was talking about and their key functions. He did not use a lot of medical jargon or um, technical terms, if you will. Like some of the technical terms I probably would recognize, but I'm also in this field. But I think that he made this book for the everyday reader. So if you feel like, okay, this kind of sounds interesting, I think that you can enjoy it, whether or not you know about the brain or not. I think it was just a really good overall view of forgetting and its benefits. So who do I recommend this book to? Let's see. Like I said, if you're just interested in kind of like what I had to say on this podcast, it's okay. Let's not say about this podcast, but go kind of read the synopsis, hear a little sample of the book, and then maybe you'll be interested. I hope that from this podcast you would be interested, but I don't feel like I'm doing a good job right now. So we're going to move past that. We're going to forget that I just said that. Ha ha ha. Um, I also recommend this book to just intellects, people who just like to learn about anything and everything. This book, like I said earlier, is different from the typical genre that I would typically read, but I thought that that was refreshing for me. It was also good for my own line of practice, which is why I picked it. And yeah, so overall, I would probably give this book a 4 out of 5. I thought that I think just not a 5 out of 5, just because again, not my typical style of reading, and it was just really easy to tune out at times. And that's not because it was boring. It's just because I feel like you have to be in the right headspace to listen to this book or to read this book because it it's just really easy to kind of veer to the left, and just kind of tune out. But I do think that he did a really good job in his writing technique. So again, he really explained all the parts of the brain that he was talking about, the mechanisms that were happening, the pathologies that were happening. He even shared some case studies, some patient stories about individuals that he's worked with in terms of their memory, whether it was normal aging memory or whether it was that more pathological aging. He actually mentioned an individual who has Alzheimer's and kind of her journey and her family's journey with that. And so yeah, I give this book a 4 out of 5. I think it was good. It was good. Um yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. So guys, I think that's really the end. This is kind of short and sweet to the point, but I think it was a good book. I hope you guys check it out. Let me know in the comments if you do. And yeah, so without further ado, the next book I will be covering is called In My Grandmother's House by Yolanda Pierce. It's an African American story, so I'm really excited to read about that. And this will be a special episode, so please stay tuned. Guys, thank you so much for bearing with me. Listen, I will be better at posting more regularly, getting some more books going because I'm kind of behind on my reading list. So I need to be posting more, reading more, all that good jazz. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you felt about this book review. If you feel like this is a book that is up your alley, should I do more books like this? Or if we should go back to the fiction books, the fun, lively books, that kind of thing. Let me know in the comments what you're thinking. But yeah, again, stay tuned for this next episode of the book review. Again, it's going to be very special. I'm excited. Um, Hopefully, you guys know when I say I'm excited, that means something's going to happen, right? So you should really tune in. You should really tune in. All right, guys, I'm done. I think that's all I have for you. Again, go follow this page, BPBB Podcast, on Instagram, on YouTube. Share with your friends, your family, all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to get this platform out there once I become more consistent. Okay. And yeah, that's all I have. Bye.